All right, we're ready for Joseph. Now, just similar in some ways to last week and some stories we've been hearing this whole time, this begins with parents and favorites. I heard last week there was some discussion that this is not our favorite parenting strategy, but whether we want to admit it or not, some of us have fallen into it, and that's okay. These are human stories. A couple of notes that I want to get out in the front, kind of on the scholarly side, and then we're going to do sort of as we did with the flood story, where we're going to read through it. It's a lot of chapters, so we're not reading every little bit. This is Genesis 37 through 46, and I know some of us have brunch plans. So, before we get into the narrative arc of this, a couple things to keep in mind. We have talked about these different sources of oral tradition that have been woven into Genesis, these priestly Yahwist accounts, this other one, the Elohist account. At this point in Genesis, and arguably probably before it, they are so woven together that it is much, much harder to separate out these sources. We don't need to do that, but if you were reading through every word of the Bible, these kind of clues that we talked about in the Noah story, these things you would look for that say, oh, this indicates it's from the priestly account, it's less obvious. I think that's particularly interesting in part of this larger point we've been talking about the way that Genesis is pulling these things together. We're kind of coming to a climax of unity across the narratives. It's also worth saying that, and maybe all the more impressive, given that it's weaving together these different traditions, but this is kind of one single narration from top to bottom. There's only one story that breaks away from Joseph, but for the most part, it's like reading a novel. It's really some of the more, compared to, say, the creation stories we began with, it's a page turner. It really is. There are details, there's plot, there's dialogue. It's a very different kind of writing. And then also in this, you would see it if we were looking right at the text, but we may be moving too fast to catch every one of these moments. But unlike some of these other stories, God shows up very differently. God actually only speaks once in this whole narrative, and it's not to Joseph, it's to Jacob or Israel. So note that, especially again, in the context of Genesis, where we've spent so much time hearing these direct proclamations from God, God moves, works, speaks very differently in this story. So keep your eyes out for that. If you do want to follow along in the Bibles, again, we're starting at chapter 37, and I'll try to kind of point out as we move through the chapters. There will also be a couple of spots where I'm going to ask for someone to read out loud, and we're going to steal Celeste's mic. I'm going to bring it over to you. So if you think that might be you, be ready. So, birth and beginning of Joseph. Joseph is the 12th child and 11th son of Jacob, the first of two sons of Jacob and Rachel. The second is Benjamin, who is the youngest. They're born in Canaan, a land that we've talked about a fair amount, right? This was, we know later on Canaan becomes the promised land. It is also the land where the Tower of Babel story took place. This is, at this point in time, this is still very much the land of the Israelites, though. We know that Joseph is favored by Jacob. Jacob loves that he has had a son so late in life. He loves the precociousness of this kid. He gives them the cloak that you may know from a very famous musical. But of course, with all that attention, all those brothers get jealous. And so at age 17, we hit the story, the first of Joseph's dream stories. Joseph tells his brothers of two dreams he had, both of which are kind of analogs of his family bowing to him. Now, this is my first ask for a reader. I would love for someone to read chapter 37, verses 5 through 11. I'll grab this mic and throw your hand up if you're feeling brave.
You said 37?
37, verses 5 through 11. Yay.
Once Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream that I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright. Then your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf."
Oh, there's a
Through
second
nine.
dream.
Through nine. Yes.
Sorry.
His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Are you indeed to have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more because of his dreams and his words.
Now, that dream is followed by a second one that ups the ante and involves also some symbols for his parents bowing down to him as well. And on the reaction for that, of course, is the brothers are angrier. It says that Jacob rebukes him, and I believe the line is, held the matter in his mind. So Jacob takes note of this. I want to just pause very quickly. We don't have to get into all the nitty-gritty details, but have we had the experience of being jealous of a sibling? It's not a fun feeling. I think it's very interesting that if you compare this to the Jacob and Esau story, where it's a very similar shade of jealousy and kind of jealousy, but with them it's 1-to-1. The 1-to-11 here really feels like it changes the dynamic a bit. And perhaps you have felt this way as well. I've often felt very critical of the brothers for what they're about to do, and I'll just explain that in a second. But on this read, it's given me occasion to pause and think about how much jealousy can spin out of control when you're talking about it in a group. It's different. The story can get out of hand, right? Out of hand enough that the brothers plot to have Joseph removed. Their first plan is they're going to throw him in a pit. The basics. Throw him in a pit and leave him there in the desert. Then there's some kind of, the brothers scuffle a little bit. One brother, Reuben, is particularly upset at this plan. Tries to, well, long story short, there's going to be a lot of long story short here. What ends up happening is that while they're sort of bickering about it, they see some slave traders passing by. Well, they're merchants, but they sell Joseph into slavery to these merchants. And that is both a horrible thing and also better than leaving him to die. Very mixed, complicated bag here, right? Then they steal his coat. They take it back to Jacob, put goat's blood on it, and that's proof that Joseph died. So now, in Jacob's knowledge, Joseph has been killed by a wild animal. That's the end of that. Chapter 1. Now, what happens after that is that Joseph is sold to someone named Potiphar, who's one of Pharaoh's generals. So, sold to someone connected to the local government, kind of higher up. And this is chapter 39. And this is right in there, right when this happens. This is the only time I'll point it out, but this line does show up a lot. 39 verse 2, it says, "The Lord was with Joseph." Not telling him what to do, but just was with. Joseph receives a lot of esteem. He does very well with the Potiphar household until there's this wild scene where Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph, who refuses, but then she gets mad and accuses him of attempted assault, and then the husband imprisons him, and then that whole situation kind of blows up. But it's in prison that Joseph's story takes this very, very interesting turn, because he's immediately approved of by the chief jailer. Because again, Joseph shows up. He is himself. He's very, seemingly very personable, because he's immediately made responsible for all the other prisoners. Verse 22 in chapter 39 says the the chief jailer committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners. So in a way, he was almost like RA of the dorm. He's kind of checking in on people. There are these tiny little bits and pieces of stories where he's very much caring about people who have been suddenly put into prison, as he himself is a prisoner. And eventually, two of the people that are thrown in there are two of Pharaoh's people. So they're higher up than the household where he was serving. It's Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. They're both thrown in. The reasons are not necessarily important, but what is important is that one night, both of them have vivid dreams and ask Joseph the next day to interpret those dreams. This is a form of care. The scene is set. They're kind of waking up in a sweat almost. They're coming up from these bad, intense dreams and saying, help, help, help. And Joseph comes in and helps them understand. Now, these dreams are specifically about the fates of the cupbearer and the baker. They're very symbolic. Joseph essentially predicts good things for one of them, bad things for the other. In 3 days, both of those eventualities come to pass. One is restored to their job, and the other is executed. Now, Joseph asks the one who lives, the cupbearer, to remember him and put in a good word with Pharaoh. But of course, he forgets for 2 years. And then 2 years later, we have dreams come in again. Pharaoh himself has a vivid dream that none of his magicians can understand. And suddenly, right in that moment, the cupbearer remembers Joseph, this guy from prison who helped him understand his wild dreams. And he recounts the story. Pharaoh is swayed, summons Joseph. And Joseph interprets this dream to be predicting 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of famine. That's what's coming to the land. He tells Pharaoh. Pharaoh is convinced and impressed. Joseph advises, with this knowledge now we can prepare. So what we should be doing is storing up grain when we can, saving it for when we will not be able to. And Pharaoh is so impressed by all of this that he ends up installing Joseph into the office of vizier, to manage the whole production. He essentially becomes the one who is responsible for traveling the whole land, collecting, and then eventually he will be in charge of redistributing the food during the famine years. Now I want to pause the story here. This is Joseph's ascent. He's about at the peak or just shy of the peak of this kind of power. Makes it sound like he's going for power, but he's been given a lot of responsibility seemingly out of nowhere. And it's all on the basis of his ability to interpret dreams. So what I want to ask right now is what does his skill in interpreting dreams say about him? What is the linkage between his ability to make sense of a dream and his ability to rise to the occasion and fairly distribute food to the people of Egypt? God is with him, Terry says. Yes, yes. And God, the Lord being with him, it can manifest in different ways, right? Sometimes perhaps understanding symbols. And there's also this sense in Genesis of your efforts being blessed when the Lord is with you, right? What else? And I ask this both in a put yourself in an ancient Near East context, but also maybe in a modern context. Yeah, you're about to say something, Nathan.
It strikes me as like a wisdom or an intuition. Like Joseph seemed to have some kind of sensitivity, some kind of self-awareness. I mean, maybe not a 17-year-old self-awareness, but like mature in prison in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the right modern metaphor for interpreting dreams. I feel like it's somewhere like a therapist or counselor, mental health care provider, maybe.
A couple things that I'll repeat so everyone can hear. Nathan said wisdom and intuition, which I kind of want to flag and dig into what is the difference between those. We don't have to do it right this very second. The other thing was, Nathan was talking about looking for a modern analog for interpreting dreams, thinking about maybe therapy and counseling. I would be curious if other roles come up for folks. Sasha?
Maybe a prophet or a storyteller,
Mm.
or perhaps a charlatan, professor.
Yeah.
He's good at getting he has charisma.
Yep, charisma, absolutely. I do think that if you look at the prose of the Genesis chapters, they make very clear that Jacob is an attractive, charming young man. Politician. Well, and he gets into office, right? Surprisingly, but yes. Yes.
So there's a difference between the interpreting of dreams in this context and the ones that were his own, which were very I statements that made the other family members jealous. Where in these cases, the interpretation is more in service to others. So there is perhaps a maturing of Joseph as he encounters this gift.
Yes, yes. Lynn was saying a maturing of this dream interpreting gift and looking at these three instances of dreams where at the beginning they're just about him and who he's going to grow up to be. But across these three instances, the next set is about the fate of other people, and then the third set is about what's happening in the world. You see that kind of making sense out of symbols or making sense out of vagueness start to expand outside of the self, which people are evidently very attracted to and very interested in. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's a powerful detail. I'll say it again so everyone can hear, but Winnie was just pointing out that people come to Joseph for the interpretation. He's not bumping into people's business and saying, hey, guess what? I know what's going to happen to you, or I know what's going to happen to you. People are saying, help me make sense out of what's going on. There's a lot that I don't understand. And that sense of agency and being come to for your gifts really does shift things. Yeah, that's a good point. We'll keep moving. So Joseph spends 7 years accruing surplus grain in Egypt to be stored away in anticipation of this famine. Pharaoh decks him out with a ring and a gold chain. He commands people to bow to him. And when the famine hits, Joseph does manage the distribution all over the land. At this point, he's now 30 years old. He gets set up with a wife. They have 2 kids, Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, both abundance and eventually the famine come to pass. And when the famine hits all the neighboring peoples, everybody hears about very quickly, and they piece together that Egypt has grain. It is regionally known. So Joseph is distributing, he's navigating that, he's going out and visiting people, he's seeing, he's not just saying, come to me, he's helping bring things out there into the world. Meanwhile, Jacob, still in Canaan, hears about Egypt having grain, so he sends his sons to buy some from the vizier. Now there's this scene where the brothers arrive, Joseph recognizes them, but they don't recognize him at all. They put him very far out of their minds, and he was 17 last time they saw him. There's this moment that I really love where, because they assume he's Egyptian, his brothers are having this conversation in Hebrew right in front of him. But it's that thing of like, oh, you didn't think that I spoke that language. And so Joseph hears everything that they're saying. And he ends up kind of feigning this harshness with them. He kind of plays with them a little bit. They obviously understand his harshness to be punishment in a sort of divine way. They interpret it as God is now punishing us for what we did to Joseph, which is kind of wild because Joseph is right there, making them think they're being punished. But Joseph sends them away not only with all the grain they purchased, but sneaks their money back in. So it's this weird thing where he speaks kind of harshly to them, but then secretly refuses to take their money and sends them back with all this food. He keeps one of the brothers as collateral and asks them, yes, take this grain back, but bring back the other brother, which is Benjamin, which is Joseph's little brother. So he says, I'm going to hold on to Simeon for now and, jail him or whatever, but he doesn't really jail him. He holds on to him, sends them out. They return back to Jacob. They're supposed to come back with Benjamin. But of course, when they get there, Jacob is distressed. Dad is upset at what is going on. He's very triggered by the fact that Simeon has not returned because he's still, in his own way, mourning the loss of Joseph, who he believes is dead. And he has this whole long thing. It's a lot of feelings in it. He has this long kind of speech that he gives his sons about, I can't lose another son. But finally, the brothers do agree or convince him that we should come back with Benjamin because we're worried we found our money back in our bags. So we're worried that they're going to find out that we didn't pay, so they're scared. And so the brothers, the way they convince Jacob is saying, well, we got to take Benjamin back so we don't get in trouble for having accidentally stolen all this grain. So they do that. They return. They come back. Excuse me. Yeah, so they come back. They have this whole conversation. Joseph says, no, this was the right thing to do. You don't need to pay. This is fine. Or, no, what does he say? He says, your God must have snuck more money back into your packs. That's what it is. So he says that, but then he does this thing where he then sneaks, he loads them up with more food and money and sends them back, but he sneaks a little silver cup into their bags. And this essentially becomes planting evidence for the idea that they stole his special silver cup of divination. And it's kind of a repeat of sneaking the money into the bags, sort of setting them up for this stress of, oh, we've done something wrong. And so Joseph, they discover the evidence that they planted, and they say, okay, well, you've got to go and now bring back your dad. I'm going to keep Benjamin as collateral again. Now, this is it's sort of the same trick repeated over and over again here of this, I'm going to be very generous, but I'm kind of going to make you feel bad, but ultimately this is all moving towards I'm trying to get the whole family here. Now, I do want to pause and think empathetically, or we can wag our fingers at Joseph if we want, but what do you think about the fact that he deceives his brothers for so long? Is this just? Is this understandable? Is he up to something more than just teasing them?
It kind of goes back to some of the stuff we talked about last week, which was, it's interesting where God sometimes uses people despite their imperfections as human beings. So we had talked about the fact that there how, despite flaws, he
Yeah.
worked God's way.
Using imperfect people, God working with imperfect people towards some bigger idea. I like, yes, I love that. Victoria and then Kim. Yeah.
Yeah, an overview of this is courage.
Courage.
I see this. Can you imagine? He had such faith that God was speaking with him, the anointing to do the dreams, that for 7 years he had all that food. He had the courage to step out and trust in God. And I think it's like walking through the Red Sea. You know, the people had the courage to do that because they knew God was guiding them. Walking on the water, come, walk on the water. You know, I think this is a great lesson. I was thinking of this 7 years. I'm like, oh, that food. He had to trust that the word was true. So I think this is a great lesson in courage to follow God. And we know, when we pray, when we go to scripture, when we come to church and listen to our, sermons and talk to each other, when we know we have the conviction to do something good and helpful to people, we remember the courage. 7 years, I think we need to do a little courage each day. I think this, to me, this is a great lesson. I've heard this story so many times, but today I really got the feeling of courage.
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, yeah, okay.
Courage.
So I may do good and have the courage to keep going.
Courage, absolutely. I love that so much, especially courage between these huge kind of gaps of what we would call in the Genesis world communication from God. It's 14 years since that dream of working on this plan to the end. That's a long time with the one message. Kim.
Yeah, so building on what Lynn said, there's no saints in the story.
Mm-hmm.
And Joseph, that's a long time from the time he was 17, what his brothers did to him, and time he spent in jail. So you can forgive him for maybe, giving them a little bit back for what he went through.
Mm-hmm.
That's just human.
Mm-hmm.
I get that. I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying that's a long, long time. And to go to prison, it's like, wow.
It's a long time, and yeah, I like the humanness of it. Yeah, Jen, 1 and 2. Oh, right to you in a second. Yeah.
I was just going to say it's satisfying if this were a TV show.
Satisfying.
If he's the main character. It's a good episode. It's in a terrible way, where you're like,
But we all know those episodes, and we do like them. Yeah. Clarice. Hmm.
Do we not admire Joseph enough to credit him with faith? So the next best thing is courage.
I wonder, how would you describe the difference between faith and courage? How would you describe the difference between faith and courage?
To me, faith is almost blind.
Hmm.
You put yourself, your hands into somebody else, and you know whether you're going through it, you can count on their end. Courage is not necessarily good or bad. It's just something. I once read a phrase that said, "Courage is given to us by God at His discretion."
Hmm. Yeah.
So to me, that's the difference. We have to find the faith God gives us.
Interesting. I like that. We're just talking a little bit about, Clarice was saying it's interesting to hear the word courage being used to sum up Joseph, and she was thinking, why not faith? I think it's a good and open-ended question that I don't want to tamp down right now, because what these words specifically mean to each of us might be a little bit different. Hold that for a minute. I'm seeing time. We're nearing the end of this section. We got a final chapter to cover, one more reading, and one more big question. If someone has a feeling that they would like to read, the next thing is chapter 45, verses 1 through 8. but I'm going to talk about it for just a second so you can find it. And actually, I'm going to pull it up myself. Here we go. 45, 1 through 8. That's right. Okay. So, Joseph has said, okay, everyone can go, but except for Benjamin. Benjamin's going to become my slave. And then their other brother, Judah, is so affected and upset by this that he pleads with the vizier, Joseph, pleads for him to take Benjamin's place. And Joseph is so moved throughout all of this. There are all these moments in these other scenes where he's kind of needling his brothers. There's these moments where Joseph steps out of the room and cries by himself in another room and then comes back in and sort of puts back on the mean face. This is the Judah pleading to be a slave in Benjamin's place is the thing that breaks Joseph. And this is what I want us to read out loud, is the moment that he turns. Keith? Michael, grab that from you. Yeah, thank you. Woo. All right. Thank you, my friend.
Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried out, "Send everyone away from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him. So dismayed were they at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come closer to me." And they came closer. He said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are 5 more years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and lord of all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt."
Thank you. This is just about the end of the story. Now, we have next week to bridge this to Exodus. This is ultimately the story of how the Israelites come to settle in the land of Goshen, which is where the Exodus narrative begins. So we'll do all that kind of linking up next week. But for today, let this be just about the end of the story. Joseph's summing up of what has happened is also for us sort of a summing up of what this story, one of the things this story could be about. And to me, what really rises to the surface, there are 2 things. One is God making good out of a bad situation. And what that looks like. I've heard this a lot in my life, and I do think it's a very important feature, a way that we conceive of God and interact with God and look for God. I've also heard this and maybe some other narratives that transform suffering into goodness. I've heard them deployed in my life in ways that sort of discourage trying to fix your situation. I've heard some of this stuff brought up as reasons to, oh, don't worry so much, like God's going to fix all that. And that's sort of repressed resistance sometimes. And I was wrestling with this over the weekend and thinking about, how can we avoid this? How does Joseph avoid this? How can we tell the difference between God making good out of something difficult and us just sitting on our hands and letting things be difficult. There will not be a fixed answer to this. But I'm curious about, I always like to think about limiting principles. You know, what are you looking for in your life that says, I got to change everything right now, or I'm taking some faithful steps and moving slowly, and we're going to see what God does with this? Winnie. Hmm. Yeah.
Where he was in this objectively bad situation, and God gave him, the opportunity to interpret these two streams, which led him to be able to interpret the Pharaoh streams, which led him to action, the plan, right, of gathering grain and distributing it during famine. So I think there is a combination of have faith because God will provide, but you can't just have faith because you also, God is kind of giving you opportunities to take action.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When he is talking about just that having faith and taking those steps and following God sometimes is taking steps, but there are also these opportunities for action. And we do see that in Joseph's story, right? These specific moments where he is invited and given the opportunity to do something, and he does. Yeah, go ahead, Victoria.
This is so wonderful. It bridges what Jesus did and Joseph.
Mm.
The supreme act of forgiveness and love. Jesus came to show us that on the cross. He forgave everybody. And Joseph is a forerunner. He shows us what is possible. And this is what Jesus. So it brings it together. This to me is a supreme act of love. Love doesn't hold grudges. Love forgives. And this is what Jesus came to teach us. And Joseph did this at the beginning. So it kind of ties it together for me. Big word, L-O-V-E. Thou
Yeah.
shalt love the Lord thy God and thy neighbor as thyself. And on that hangs all the law and the prophets. So look what Joseph did. It's like a forerunner. It prepares us. And Jesus took that and gave us the good news that we love each other. And Joseph did this. It's like bridging the two together and say, thank you, Lord. Thank you for bringing the gospel of love to us. It pulls it all together.
Yes, a supreme act of love. And isn't it a supreme act of love from Judah offering to take Benjamin's place that breaks Joseph's heart open and I think in a way completes his transformation? I might leave us there. I know we're running on time, and I could talk all day long, but we got next week for that. To wrap it up and move us into the anthem and the rest of service, I'd love to just say a very quick prayer with y'all, if you will. The Lord be with you. God, hold all these questions, these open-ended questions, these journeys without clear ends. Hold them in your heart. Be with us. Bless these meditations, these reflections, all the guesswork that we do when we talk about you. But keep us certain in the things we know, that you are love, and love leads us somewhere. Amen.